Greetings, fellow YouTubers. I'm here today just to give some off-the-cuff thoughts on the Nintendo Switch 2 before its launch. Having been a Nintendo fan my entire life, ever since the humble Game Boy, I find myself very much invested in it. And a console launch is exciting, but I've got to admit that ever since the fall of 2024, when some of the rumors started coming out, my opinions on what could be and now what we know to be have slowly been, shall we say, souring a bit. But let's get into that. So, I'm not going to be talking about prices or launch software yet. That's really a discussion for another time, if at all, because my concern right now is the hardware, which is something that won't change until a mid-system refresh comes, if a mid-system refresh comes at all. So it's going to be what we're stuck with for probably the next 7+ years if the original Switch's life is anything to go by. And I think that's worth talking about and really considering because obviously we don't get consoles very often. So we want the best that we can get, and even though I, like many people, get caught up in the hype, I just, like I said, my opinion has started to sour just a little bit the more that I've thought about it. So, like I said, it all started in the fall of last year when we got the rumors and screenshots, alleged CAD files of what the Switch 2 would look like. And it basically was just a bigger Switch 1 in those files. It had a slightly different kickstand, and it had some odd new buttons on the top back of the two Joy-Con, but that was pretty much it. Otherwise, it looked like just a slightly bigger Switch 1. And of course, I'm thinking, well, we don't know if these are legit. We don't know anything at all. So I'm going to give it a fair shot, wait, see what happens. Then the January Direct comes. And that pretty much confirmed all of the rumors that had been leaked thus far. And even though that and the Future Direct tried to differentiate the two systems, saying this is more than just a bigger Switch, the more that you think about it, especially more that I've thought about it, the more it does seem to just be a bigger Switch. So it kind of confirmed a lot of the worries I had and even brought up a few new ones as time's gone on. So let's start with that. Now, obviously, it's not necessarily a bad thing for a system to just be a better version of a previous system. That's pretty much what PlayStation has done all the time, even to the detriment of some things like its controller design, where it took up until the current DualSense controller for it to really get to a state that, number one, didn't feel kind of cheap and plasticky, and number two, actually felt a little more ergonomic than what we had in the 90s. But Nintendo's always been a little bit different. They've always had a sort of, you know, flair about them, an experimental flair, if you will. They've always loved to innovate in the way you play games, not just how powerful the system is. They've really, in fact, with after the GameCube in 2002, they really dropped out of the power race. Obviously, the Wii was only a little bit more powerful than the GameCube, and the Wii U after that and the Switch after that have only been a little more powerful than the systems that came before. So Nintendo did just kind of drop out of the rat race for more power that consoles like the PlayStation and the Xbox have because Nintendo's thought it could get by on making great games and making innovative ways to play those games. And, most of us who have been Nintendo fans have been on board with that. Obviously, we'd like to have more power, but as this I'm about to lay out, that might have been a sort of monkey's paw wish. Because out of the box, not only is the Nintendo Switch 2 not any different from the Switch 1 except in size and power, but it also has a lot of the same flaws. So let's start with what I observed about the tablet itself. When the Switch 1 came out, a lot of people were complaining about the tablet itself being scratched when they inserted it into the dock, whether it's the screen or the bodywork. Especially when more limited edition consoles started to come out, people complained about, hey, if I dock my system in there, even if I've gone and gotten a screen protector so I don't scratch the heck out of the screen, now I've got to worry about the back of it being scratched, the designs being scratched off and scuffed to the point where they're not even visible if I keep docking and undocking the system. And throughout the entire life, even when the Switch OLED came out, this issue wasn't really addressed. And my personal Switch, even though I do have a limited edition one, I always keep in a silicone case and with a screen protector on at all times, which means that unless I take the case off to look at it, I can't really enjoy the limited edition nature of the console as much. I mostly get to enjoy it from the dock, but the system itself, it's pretty much always hidden because I have that silicone case on it. Now I got the case that had some designs on it. I got if you're wondering, one of the DLC Go cases, and it had some really nice Legend of Zelda designs on it, unlicensed ones, but still very nice. So I got to enjoy it that way. But the system underneath is not actually a Zelda Switch. So those designs don't quite mesh with the special edition Switch I got. And even if they did, they're not exactly the same as what's on the Switch. So right out of the box, having a very similar dock that you have to slide the entire console all the way down into, not have the screen exposed, the back is right up in there, it can rattle back and forth. That's a bit concerning. That was a massive concern on the first Switch, and it doesn't look to have been addressed here at all. But, one of the biggest problems, or at least concerns that people had when they saw the tablet, was the fact that despite getting a mid-system upgrade in the Switch 1 to the Switch OLED, the new screen does not appear to be an OLED at all. Now, I know I said I wasn't going to mention price, and I'll still steer clear of that, but the price was increased on the original Switch by $50, and I'm sure it would be a bit more than the already rather steep asking price here. But it's still a bit of a hard pill to swallow when you had an upgrade on the previous system's refresh, and that upgrade is left off of your brand new system that you're getting. And a lot of people thought that was going to be because of VRR, variable refresh rate. And for those of you who've never used VRR with an OLED screen, you might not understand this, but it can cause what's known as screen tearing. It's a rather ugly incident where the screen looks like it's been split in half and the two halves are kind of sliding over each other. It's ugly. You don't want to see it. So if the Switch 2 were going to have VRR to help with upping the frame rates of games from maybe a lower 30 to a higher 60 or even an unlocked frame rate, then yeah, I can kind of see them not having an OLED screen on there. And they kind of did that, but again, the monkey's paw finger curls once more because that VRR is only supported in handheld mode, which automatically has a lower, lower potential. The screen itself is only 1080p, so you don't have the same kind of issues as if you were having, say, a 4K monitor and you were trying to output to that. So the fact that there is no OLED screen, it's not ideal. It's not ideal. Even though the LCD that's been shown on there, at least in videos, looks nice, a lot of people, myself included, would kind of prefer to keep with the OLED because it was a very stark contrast between the original Switch and the OLED model. So not having that, it just does kind of seem like a bit of a downgrade on this new system. A lot of people I know are saying the LCD looks nice, but maybe that's more of a cope. Maybe if and when people get Switch 2s in their hands, maybe they'll say the LCD screen really does look that nice, and maybe it was worth it. But for my part, I'm looking at it and I'm saying, it doesn't quite look as bright, and it has a large bezel on it. And again, when you went from the Switch original version to the Switch OLED, you got rid of most of that bezel, so the screen also got larger. And since the overall dimensions of the Switch 2 are also larger, yeah, you kind of want to have the most screen real estate you can if you're going to sacrifice the pocketability of the console. Which brings me to my next point, and that's the Joy-Con. So the Joy-Con pretty much look identical, but just a bit broader. Uh, They're bigger, but only in the length and width dimension. The depth, like the entire Switch 2, is the same depth as the Switch 1. And really, I'm going to be honest with you, the Switch 1 Joy-Cons aren't great. I mean, they're really not great. I think they are feature packed as they are. They might be the worst controllers that Nintendo has come out with. And that's saying a lot in a world of original NES boxes that dug into your hands and awkward N64 three-prong controllers. Nintendo's done some crazy things. But again, they've always learned, improved, iterated, or at least switched it up, no pun intended. This time, it doesn't feel like they really have. The Joy-Cons themselves don't have D-pads, and they do not have anything that makes them more ergonomic to hold, aside from being just a little bit bigger. The real kicker is that they don't even seem to have well, we know they don't have Hall effect joysticks now. That was actually confirmed. And maybe they have made improvements to address the rampant drift that a lot of people suffered. I'm sure they worked on it, but having those Hall effect sticks would be an easy, guaranteed fix using proven technology, something that was, for a long time, part of Nintendo's modus operandi. To go with existing technology, proven technology, and that way your stuff holds up and you don't experience things like Joy-Con drift, for example. Could easily be avoided. So even if they have developed something completely new to try and solve that issue, it's still only tested in their laboratories, and Hall effect has been broadly tested and could easily have been implemented. So you get down to it, there's really no reason the Joy-Con should be exactly the same form factor. There really isn't. The only reason the original ones were that form factor were so that when they were disconnected, they could be used on their side. That's why there was no D-pad, but instead the 4 buttons. And that's also why they were, just kind of blocked off, just little things that weren't in any way contoured to the human hand so that you could hold them multiple ways and still not have a great experience in any way, but not have an extremely awkward experience in the held on the side mode. But here's the thing about that. Now, with the Switch having sold, what is it, like 140-ish million units? Pretty much everyone who could be a customer for the Switch 2 has already got Joy-Cons from the Switch 1, meaning if you really wanted to have a spare pair of tiny controllers that you could hand off to a bunch of people at a party, customers have already got those. It's called the Switch 1 Joy-Con. So, something that you could have really done to differentiate the Joy-Con both in terms of looks, so that when the Switch 2 is sitting on the shelf of a store, it doesn't just look like a slightly bigger Switch 1, but also in terms of functionality to really draw customers in, would have been to change the form factor. And that's proven by the fact that during the Switch 1's life, so many manufacturers made better form factor, either attachments or separate Joy-Con. Satisfy Grip has blown up massively on YouTube for its advertisements of basically a grip that you can slot the entire Switch into that gives you something ergonomic to actually hold onto those Joy-Cons and have a comfortable time playing long term without the Switch feeling like, well, just a tablet, like a caveman holding a slab for a long period of time. And I myself, again on my original Switch, have gone with the MobaPad M6 HD. Those are the same price as a Joy-Con, about $80, and they've got everything the original Joy-Con has, except that bottom little IR sensor. But they've got everything else the original Joy-Con has, including HD Rumble, all the side buttons, all the functionality. Plus, they have even more features. They have a turbo feature, which, again, a lot of third-party Joy-Cons have. And they also had, for one, a D-pad, but number two, a swappable D-pad. The second D-pad option had the sort of Microsoft Xbox dish. So if you wanted to use the D-pad in more than just the 4 cardinal directions and wanted to use them in 8 directions, as most games do, you had a very easy time with that. It also has Hall Effect joysticks. I'm kind of making this sound like a MobaPad advertisement, but it's not. The point is that 7 years into the Switch's life, somebody came out with a better version of the Joy-Con, and then the very next year, you get Nintendo coming out with saying, hey, here's basically the Joy-Con again. Same form factor, same buttons and no D-pad, maybe even the same drifting effects. We'll have to wait and see, but it's not flattering. And again, the more you think about starting over, waiting for third-party developers to make something, whether it's a new Joy-Con or a new Satisfy grip or whatever, that allows you to have a comfortable playing experience, you kind of feel like you're starting over again, like you were in 2017, saying, oh yes, it's really cool, but after a couple hours, it doesn't feel as comfortable to play. And Nintendo really had 8 years to learn from that and doesn't quite seem to have done so. And the last issue that I have with the Joy-Con come down to the magnetic attachments. Now, I know that when some people use their original Joy-Con on their Switch ones, they wore out the little bit of plastic that kept it clicked in place, so that if they put enough force on the bottom of the Joy-Con, they could pop it out without pushing the button. That happened to people who had their Joy-Cons for a very long time and managed to avoid all stick drift, or maybe had it repaired, but snapped those Joy-Cons on and off hundreds and hundreds of times. They started to wear down that little bit of plastic. Otherwise, that was the only thing that I think made the original Joy-Cons attachments bad, or not even bad, but just less than ideal. Now I look at the Switch 2 and I say, well, here's an entire plethora of other problems with the Joy-Con. Because when you attach them via the magnets, number one, maybe that would affect the Hall Effect sticks. Maybe that's the reason they couldn't include them. But number two, you have so many degrees of freedom instead of just the one up and out that the first Joy-Con had. You got so many degrees of freedom that now you have to worry about if you accidentally pick the Switch up and hit the gigantic release button on the back, are you going to lose the Joy-Con or have the system fall apart in your hands? Because I know that especially with children, but even with adults, if you go and pick something up in haste and there's a giant button on it, there is a real chance you're going to engage that giant button. And if the system falls apart and it falls on the floor, you could experience scuffing, screen cracking, cracking of the body, anything like that. And you just could not even fathom that happening with the Switch 1 Joy-Con because the button to release was very small. You had to press it in very deliberately and thoroughly, and then you could only slide it out one way. It's a system that worked really well, but I guess the magnets are cooler. I just don't really see that so much as a functional improvement as maybe an attempt at a selling point. But hey, that's just me. Hey, there is one thing that the Joy-Con are doing now that they didn't on the previous rendition, and that's the mouse controls. I think that has the potential to be a lot of fun. I do. I think that it has the potential to be really useful in shooters and some other games like maybe Pikmin. If you play Pikmin and you need to aim where you're throwing the Pikmin very precisely, I could see that coming in handy. Having said that, and this is where I'm going to get into more of just my wish list, I guess, rather than a criticism of what is, I also think that Joy-Con could have used some improvements in terms of their functionality, what was included hardware-wise. Specifically, I really think it could have used a forward IR sensor similar to what the Wiimote had, because there's also no confirmation that the gyros inside are any more precise. And if you ever tried playing with the motion controls on Joy-Con, which I know is not for everybody. I know there's some people who will avoid motion controls like the plague, but if you don't, if you use those motion controls, then you will know that the gyros drifted a heck of a lot too. Every game that used them, whether it was one of the Pikmin games, or Skyward Sword, or Metroid Prime, for example, which again, we're getting a new one of those, all of those games had to have a dedicated reset cursor to center of screen button on them because the gyros drifted so much. And the fact that there is no confirmation that this is getting any better, again, it has me really concerned. It makes me think that number one, we're not improving at all, and number two, Nintendo just really does want to do the Switch again, but without any innovations. So we're starting again having to pay more money for the same experience, but with slightly better graphics, and that's really concerning from the standpoint of somebody who's been a Nintendo fan and somebody who, again, kitted out his original Switch 1 to the nines, partly to make up for what I think Nintendo is lacking in. So, I guess I'll go ahead and close this out by saying that even though there's not a whole lot that we know right now about software, we've seen a little bit of the interface and eShop, which are exactly the same. I, I really hope that it lives up to the hype, because the one thing the Switch 2 does promise to deliver is that power. It is the first time ever that Nintendo has sort of dipped a toe back into the race of trying to eke out more power above pretty much everything else. And because, like I've said for the past 20 some minutes, we have really sacrificed a lot to just get more power and a slightly bigger size and pretty much nothing else except those mouse controls, I hope it ends up being worth it. I hope that when you play something like Cyberpunk 2077 on here, that it really feels better than the Steam Deck. It feels like a worthy way to play this game. I hope that Nintendo gives reasonable, and again, not to talk about money, but not charge out the nose for a ton of little upgrades on things like, Mario Odyssey, etc. A lot of their first party titles that could stand to have just that little bit of graphical bump or that little bit of increased frame rate. Maybe, uh, maybe you could go back to that lovely Thousand Year Door reboot that we got a couple of years back, or was it just last year? Oh my goodness, it might have just been last year. The lovely Thousand Year Door remake that we got, and up the frame rate on that to 60 frames per second because that got a lot of people in a bit of a hullabaloo also. I didn't really mind it, but if you can do little things like that on existing games and not nickel and dime your customers for them, you could slowly win them over. But right now, think I think the Switch 2 is going to struggle a little bit. And again, that's part of the reason why I'm making this video is just for my own sanity and to look back on it in another 5, 10 years, and maybe we can all laugh at it. Maybe I can say, huh, wow, I knew nothing. I maybe I should have had more faith in focusing just on the power and not concern myself so much with the lack of improvements in other areas. But I've got my doubts, and those doubts, again, I don't want the system to fail. I would love to see it improve, but uh, I really do have my doubts, and especially because of third-party developers. The Switch One, a lot of its lifeblood was the fact that it got indie games on board. It was the indie game machine. When Nintendo did not re-release their games for sale via Virtual Console and only did their subscription service, and when some third parties were starting to struggle putting games on there, and you went into game presentations again, seeing Nintendo left off as they had been on the Wii U and the Wii because those systems couldn't handle modern games, maybe we will start getting more of Nintendo being included in that. But in terms of smaller games, your Stardew Valleys, your Dave the Divers, you really don't have any need for a Switch 2. And if you're programming a brand new game, what are the odds that you're going to go out of your way to make it Switch 2 specific when the console is backwards compatible? Yes, I do love that backwards compatibility feature. That is one thing that, out of all the complaints I've listed, I cannot complain about from a customer standpoint. You love to have things backwards compatible because I have a substantial Switch library. A lot of other people do also, and you don't want to rebuy everything. But again, if you are making a game from the ground up, say the creator of Stardew Valley is working on a new game called Haunted Chocolatier, and it doesn't look to be much more demanding than Stardew Valley is from a graphical and power standpoint. So are you going to go out of your way to make a Switch 2 version, or are you just going to say, I'm going to make a Switch 1 version and you can play it on Switch 2 via backwards compatibility? And if you do that, then the Switch 2 library does not grow as much, and there is less of a reason for customers to have one. I myself did not feel the need to pre-order the Switch 2, not just because of some of the concerns I have, but because I have a massive backlog of things, a lot of which are third-party or older games that got ports to the system and did not demand the power that the Switch 2 is bringing. So for a couple of things, again, like your Cyberpunks, sure, you're going to want to have that power so that you can have a port and have it look decent and not look like mud or a chalk drawing that's been rained on. But at the end of the day, you don't need that much power for a lot of what Switch users bought in for. And because of that, I have to wonder how many people are actually going to invest in it. Because once the hype dies down of this being the new shiny thing and people have a more objective look at the new console versus the Switch 1, again, not even talking about pricing of it, just talking about the capabilities of what you've got for both consoles, and they see, well, hardware-wise, the Switch 2 has got more power, but it's got a screen that is on par with or maybe worse than what we had on the Switch 1. Got Joy-Cons that are on par with, or maybe in some ways worse than, what we have on Switch 1. And it's even bigger, which means you can't pocket it as easily. I know some people still really value that pocketability. And if this, being as big as it is, you really can't pocket outside of maybe a pair of cargo shorts, then I think a lot of people will decide, you know what, my Switch 1 is holding up really well. I got everything that I need for it. If you're like me, you've decked your Switch 1 out to the nines. It's got the Joy-Con improvements that you wanted. It's got a screen protector. It's got a silicone case. It's got a very affordable micro SD card. I've actually got a 2 terabyte one in mind, so I will essentially never run out of storage. And a lot of people will look at it and say, do I really want to start all over again for something that maybe has a couple of exclusive titles? I don't know. Only time will tell. And that's what this little time capsule video is for. So thanks for joining me on this ride, and I'll see you next time, whether it's to laugh at this or to say, oh, look, unfortunately, he was right about a lot of it. But hey, let's keep an optimistic mind, eh? So until next time, this is your fellow YouTuber signing out.